It was the product of two boat builders who learned their craft from a bunch of other famous boat building companies, and then they got together to make something totally new. It was a boat made for the Florida Keys and bombing around the Bahamas that turned into some serious coastal cruisers afterward. And then the company started solely making catamarans. This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about Endeavour. So last week we talked about Gulfstar, which leads us to an interesting story that sort of starts from two Gulfstar employees that went out on their own with some knowledge from previous employers building different famous brands of boats from famous companies with some help from Ted Irwin from Irwin Yachts. And these two guys started their own company. We're talking about John Brooks and Rob Valdez. John got his start working with Charlie Morgan and Ted Irwin, two names that you should know at this point. After working at Morgan and Irwin, he somehow found himself at Gulfstar. Rob Valdez, on the other hand, doesn't have the pedigree from multiple different companies. He's just the little brother of Dick Valdez. Dick Valdez does have pedigree. He co-founded Columbia with a guy named Vince Lazzara, and you should remember him from last week's episode because they co-founded Columbia, and Vince left to make Gulfstar. This gets a little complicated. From Columbia, Vince left, formed Gulfstar, but little brother Rob Valdez, instead of going to Columbia with Big Brother, went with Vince to Gulfstar. So both of our guys, John and Rob, ended up at Gulfstar at sort of two different times and ended up working there at the same time. The boat building world at that point in sort of the southern US was like a big boys club of boat builders and designers all working together and moving from company to company, some founding their own companies. The sailboat world wasn't very big in the 60s and 70s, maybe with only like 10 or 15 key players that we'll ever talk about. So anyway, our two guys, Rob and John, they end up at Gulfstar together, and they decide, forget Gulfstar, we're breaking out and we're founding our own company. So they break away, they quit their jobs, and they found Endeavour Yachts. However, they didn't really have a great designer on staff. Like, they didn't have a Carl Alberg or anybody like that. So they needed a design. So they contacted their friend, who one of them worked for previous, Ted Irwin. That should definitely be a name we know at this point. So Ted gave them a mold for the Irwin 32. Ted was done with it. He said, here's the 32. What he wanted in return was a small share in the new company, Endeavour Yachts. So even trade, they get the Irwin 32, and Ted Irwin gets a little bit of share in Endeavour. Everybody knows everybody. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to keep this channel improving. I want to give a big shout out to new patrons this week, Justin and Ron. Thank you guys. Welcome to the team. So Endeavour now has the molds for the Irwin 32, and their in-house designer, Dennis Robbins, he modified that Irwin 32 a little bit here and there, tweaky, and they came up with the Endeavour 32, which ended up making some 600 boats. The 32 sold so well that Endeavour immediately started looking for the next design, but they didn't have a designer. So without a designer, they had to be a little less conventional. They started trolling, and I mean trolling, the Miami River looking for boat designs, like drive up and down the river and look at boats. And they did find a boat, an abandoned boat. It was an old sailboat. It was a Ray Creekmore designed old boat that they liked. So they took it. They cut it in half, and Dennis, their in-house designer, added 3 feet to the middle of the hull, and they glued it back together. Endeavour 37. Done. Seriously, unconventional. And they made and sold almost 500 of these Endeavour 37s based on a design that they found abandoned, cut in half, added 3 feet to boat. 500 boats. The early Endeavour boats were fairly simple. They had short masts, they had outboard chain plates that were sort of bolted to the hull, long, heavy keels, shallow draft. They weren't really designed to be fast or go upwind very well. They're not race boats. They were, however, roomy and comfortable and aimed straight at people who wanted to go long-term cruising. The in-house designer, Dennis, ended up leaving Endeavour, and he went over to Ted Irwin's firm, Irwin Yachts, and a man named Bob Johnson took over as lead designer at Endeavour and created the Endeavour 40 and then the 43. More heavy, well laid up, tough boats with shallow drafts aimed straight at the cruising community, us. The 1980s created a lot more pressure on boat builders, especially Endeavour. The world was sort of in a recession of brand new boat buyers. So with less new boats being sold and more being expected from new boats, from buyers of new boats, people expected a lot more from their brand new boat, and Endeavour tried to deliver. They needed to stay comfortable and safe, which Endeavour had in spades at that point with their full keel, heavy laid up, really tough boats. But now the public wanted faster and bigger. The Endeavour 40 was created, and a few other designers started to help. America's Cup designer Johan Valentin created the 38, and Bruce Kelly got on board and created the 33 and the 35. Some major changes were made to speed the boats up as well, some kind of unconventional stuff. Originally, the core of the decks was plywood, little 4 to 6 inch squares of plywood sandwiched in between the fiberglass, but now they were using foam core, and they came up with a special steel grid construction where they laid steel grid work into the glass work to stiffen the hulls and make them faster. By the mid-80s, the company was shifting toward a little bit more ocean-going boats instead of just boats for the Florida Keys and the Bahamas. And a lot of them were center cockpit, so it's very common to see a lot of Endeavours that are center cockpit. Sizes were up too, because that's what the public wanted. They even made boats in the low 50-foot range. The company was in their heyday at this point. They had some 300 employees, and they were making 200 boats a year. From the mid-80s to the early 90s, which is terrible for sailboat companies, the company went bankrupt, and it was sold a few different times, changing hands from different financial and investment teams and firms. In between, one of the owners actually flipped the company and took a stab at turning the company into producing catamarans, only catamarans, which was sort of like forward thinking for the time, because those sell really well now, but I think they were like 20 years too early. After changing hands again multiple years later, Endeavour was rebranded into Endeavour Catamaran Corporation, and they're still making boats now, and they have actually found some success. I do have some personal experience with Endeavour, and although the company is in Florida and the boats were made in Florida, the sailing club I keep Lady K at up here on the Great Lakes in Canada has 2 Endeavours side by side docked. I believe they're 37s, and they're both extremely pristine and good examples of what you would look for in a mid to high 30-foot Endeavour. They're both in great shape, and they're both very well cared for. Both are full keel. They're heavily laid up, go anywhere style boats. They have very roomy cabins. They're very livable. One of the 2 is actually heavily outfitted for long-term cruising. It's got dinghy davits with a rib hanging off the back, a massive storm anchor on the roller in the front, tons of anchor chain, loads of batteries. This boat has been so well outfitted that the owner took the time to install a bow thruster. This is Endeavour 37. Really cool. So Endeavour is known to be very well made, very heavy boat, and they're the boats that you and I might look for in a cruising, long-term, sail around everywhere sort of boat. The 37 is a good example because you can find them all over Florida. And honestly, for a 37-foot boat that's well made and full keel and can go anywhere, you can get them for anywhere from 20 to 50 grand, depending on the condition. The 37 is a serious contender if you're looking for a long-term liveaboard that will easily sail Florida and the Caribbean and that sort of a thing, all the tropics. Things to watch out for are really the same as anything. You want to watch out for deck core, engine hours, and standing rigging. Moving up to the bigger endeavors, the center cockpit, which they started building for ocean sort of passages, that lands you just shy of $100,000, and you will still find these all over the world. They really are a go-anywhere boat. There's even one for sale right now in Hawaii, which means the boat that was made in Florida made its way to Hawaii, which is a totally different ocean, and that's speaking volumes to what endeavors actually are. If your question that you're trying to answer is what boat is widely available for less than 50 grand, will be very capable of long-term cruising with you and the missus, or you and the missus and 1 or 2 children, was overbuilt like crazy and well made and has the room inside to accommodate everyone happily, the epitome of the answer to that question is Endeavor.